What if one stormy night, a stranger showed up at your doorstep? Not just any stranger, but someone who could change your life forever. For Lila, it wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the beginning of a journey she never saw coming. But as rain poured outside, little did she know that saving this lost soul would lead her to uncover secrets about herself, challenge everything she believed in, and force her to confront the harsh realities of humanity, all while battling her own struggles. The rain lashed against the window panes. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded beast. The small Brooklyn apartment trembled with each powerful gust, as if the storm itself sought to consume it. Inside, under the dim glow of a flickering light bulb, Lila Harper sat hunched over a battered wooden table. Her fingers tightened around a crumpled medical bill. The ink was slightly smudged from where her tears had fallen earlier, but she didn't have time to cry anymore. Bills piled high in front of her: rent, electricity, water, and then the worst of them all, the hospital fees for her mother, who lay weak and frail in the other room. Her breathing was shallow, her strength dwindling with each passing day. Lila had done everything she could. She took extra shifts, skipped meals, even borrowed money she wasn't sure she could ever repay. But it was never enough. A violent gust rattled the loose window latch, snapping her out of her spiraling thoughts. She sighed and stood, rubbing the exhaustion from her eyes as she walked over to fasten it properly before the cold night air crept inside. But just as she reached out, her breath hitched in her throat. Through the rain-streaked glass, barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlight, sat a lone figure huddled on the doorstep. It was a frail, elderly woman. Her silver hair was soaked and plastered against her wrinkled skin. Her thin arms wrapped around herself in a feeble attempt to ward off the cold. Her clothes, far too light for the weather, clung to her trembling body. Her expression, lost and vacant, sent a pang through Lila's chest. She didn't hesitate. Throwing open the door, she stepped into the downpour. Icy rain immediately drenched her thin sweatshirt, but she didn't care. "Ma'am," Lila called out over the storm. "Are you okay?" The old woman barely reacted, only lifting her face slightly. Her eyes were clouded with confusion. Her lips moved as if searching for the right words, but all that came out was a weak murmur. This is my home." Lila blinked. She glanced back at her Brooklyn apartment, then at the woman. That couldn't be right. She had lived here for years, and there was no way this woman belonged here. But she didn't have time to question it. The rain was relentless, and the old woman looked on the verge of collapse. Lila crouched down, her own fingers already numb from the cold, and gently touched the woman's shoulder. "Come inside, okay? You can't stay out here in this weather." For a moment, the old woman hesitated, but as another strong gust hit, she gave a slight, uncertain nod. Lila wrapped an arm around her and helped her inside, her muscles straining under the woman's frail weight. The doors shut behind them, muting the roar of the storm. A shiver ran down Lila's spine, but she quickly turned her focus back to the woman, whose frail body trembled violently. Without a second thought, Lila rushed to grab a clean towel from the tiny linen closet. Returning, she gently patted down the woman's drenched hair and shoulders. "Let's get you warmed up," Lila murmured, her voice softer now. "I'll find you some dry clothes, okay?" The woman only blinked at her, still lost in whatever fog filled her mind. Lila's chest tightened. She had seen people like this before, lost, confused, their memories slipping away like sand through their fingers. Her mother wasn't there yet, but she had nightmares about the day it would happen. Would someone take her in if she wandered alone in the rain, scared and disoriented? Or would she be left out in the cold, ignored by the world? Shaking the thought away, Lila moved quickly. She found an old sweater and a pair of sweatpants, probably too big, but they would do. She helped the woman change, mindful of her fragile limbs, then guided her to sit by the small heater in the corner of the room. "You must be hungry," Lila said, more to herself than anything, as she turned toward the tiny kitchen. There wasn't much, just some rice, a couple of eggs, a few vegetables she had been saving for the week. But she couldn't let the woman go hungry, not after all she'd been through. As she started cooking, the apartment filled with the comforting scent of warm food, chasing away some of the cold that had settled in. When she placed a steaming bowl of simple rice porridge in front of the woman, the old lady's lips quivered slightly. "Thank you, dear," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lila swallowed past the lump in her throat. "You don't have to thank me," she said gently, watching as the woman took slow, careful bites. As the minutes stretched on, the storm outside continued to rage. But inside the small Brooklyn apartment, it felt a little less lonely. As Lila sat across from the woman, quietly making sure she ate enough, a single thought rooted itself deep in her mind. Tomorrow, she would take the woman to the police. But no matter what happened, she would not let her be alone. The next morning, the rain had finally stopped, but the cold lingered in the air. A soft gray light filtered through the thin curtains, casting shadows across the tiny apartment. Lila sat at the small table, her fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, watching the elderly woman across from her. The woman, who had introduced herself only as Margaret Maggie Dawson in a fleeting moment of clarity the night before, was staring out the window. Her frail hands rested in her lap, her eyes filled with a distant, vacant sadness. Lila had barely slept. Every few hours, she had woken up to check on Maggie, making sure she hadn't wandered off in the night. But now, morning had come, and she had no choice but to do what she knew was right. Setting her mug down, she cleared her throat gently. "Maggie, we're going to the Brooklyn precinct, okay? They might be able to help find your family." Maggie blinked, as if trying to process the words, then simply nodded. There was no recognition in her expression, no sign that she even knew she was lost. Lila's heart clenched, but she forced a small smile. "Come on," she said softly, helping the woman to her feet. "Let's get you home." The walk to the Brooklyn precinct was quiet, the city still damp from the storm. When they arrived, the inside was just as Lila expected, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly, the sharp scent of stale coffee and ink filling the air. A bored-looking officer sat behind the desk, barely glancing up as Lila approached. "Excuse me," she started, keeping her voice steady. "I found this woman outside my apartment last night. She's lost and doesn't remember where she lives. Can you check if anyone's reported her missing?" The officer finally looked up, his gaze shifting lazily to Maggie. He let out a sigh, then clicked around on his computer for a few seconds before shaking his head. "No reports matching her description," he said flatly, already looking like he wanted to move on. Lila frowned. "That's it? That's all you're going to do?" The officer gave a half-hearted shrug. "We'll keep her information on file. If someone calls looking for her, we'll let you know." Lila clenched her jaw, frustration burning beneath her skin. "So you're just going to let her wander the streets until then?" "We don't have the resources to house every lost old lady in the city," he replied, his tone dripping with indifference. "If you're so concerned, you can take care of her yourself." Lila's fingers tightened into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. She glanced at Maggie, who stood quietly beside her, looking around the station with innocent confusion. She was so vulnerable, so unaware of how easily the world could swallow her whole. Lila turned back to the officer, her voice firm. "Fine, I will." Without another word, she reached for Maggie's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze as she led her back outside. The air was crisp, the streets bustling with people rushing to work. The world moved on as if nothing had happened. As they walked, a nagging thought settled in Lila's mind. She had to work today. She couldn't afford to miss another shift. But leaving Maggie alone wasn't an option. What if she wandered off again? What if she got hurt? Lila glanced down at the woman beside her, her decision solidifying. "Looks like you're coming to work with me," she murmured, offering a small, reassuring smile. Maggie simply nodded, as if she had no other choice. And maybe she didn't, but neither did Lila. The Central Perk Cafe was already bustling when Lila stepped inside, the rich scent of coffee and fresh pastries thick in the air. She held Maggie's hand firmly, guiding her to a small table tucked in the corner, away from the rush of morning customers. The old woman sat down slowly, her movements careful and uncertain. Her eyes scanned the unfamiliar surroundings with quiet curiosity. Lila crouched beside her, speaking gently. "I'll be right over there, okay? Just sit here, relax. If you need anything, just wave at me." Maggie nodded absently, her fingers tracing the rim of the water glass Lila had placed in front of her. Satisfied, Lila straightened, adjusted her apron, and rushed behind the counter, where the usual chaos of the morning shift awaited. She worked as fast as she could, stealing glances at Maggie whenever she had a second to breathe. The woman sat quietly, sipping water, occasionally nibbling at the piece of bread Lila had bought for her. As the hours dragged on, Lila felt the weight of exhaustion settle on her shoulders. Her mind constantly flickers between work and the elderly woman in the corner. Then, suddenly, her phone vibrated in the pocket of her apron. Pulling it out with slightly trembling fingers, she glanced at the unknown number before answering. Hello. The voice on the other end was urgent, breathless. Is this Lila? My name is Carter Dawson. My mother has been missing since yesterday. The police gave me your number. Lila's heart leapt in her chest. She's here. She's safe. You can come right now. There was a pause, a sharp inhale of relief. I'll be there immediately. As soon as the call ended, Lila exhaled, tension easing from her body. Finally, Maggie would be reunited with her family. She glanced over at the old woman, who was now stirring her water with a spoon, unaware of the relief washing over Lila. But before she could even process her emotions, a sharp voice cut through the air. Lila. She stiffened instantly. Rachel Dawson, the cafe manager, approached her, arms crossed tightly over her chest, lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Lila, Rachel repeated, her voice clipped. That old woman has been sitting here all day. And what has she ordered? A single glass of water and a piece of bread. Her eyes narrowed, dripping with condescension. You think this place is some kind of charity? Lila's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression neutral. She had known this confrontation was inevitable the moment she walked through the doors with Maggie. But that didn't make it any easier. She took a steady breath, keeping her voice calm. I paid for her food, Rachel. She's not bothering anyone. Rachel let out a short, humorless laugh, tilting her head as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Oh, please, don't act like this is about money. It's about appearances, Lila. Customers don't want to see some sad, old woman loitering in the corner, taking up space, making the place look like a damn shelter. Her voice dripped with disgust, her carefully curated professionalism cracking just enough to reveal what lay beneath. Lila's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to remain composed. She has nowhere else to go, she said evenly, refusing to give Rachel the reaction she was looking for. That's not my problem, Rachel shot back, stepping closer, lowering her voice to a sharp whisper. But let me tell you what is my problem. You bringing this charity case into my cafe, making it everyone else's problem. Her eyes flicked toward Maggie, filled with thinly veiled contempt. And if she's that helpless, maybe she should have thought ahead instead of waiting around for people like you to feel sorry for. Lila's breath hitched, her body tensing so suddenly it almost hurt. She had spent her entire life swallowing her anger, learning to pick her battles, knowing there were things she couldn't change, people she couldn't fight. But this was different. She lifted her chin, her voice quiet but firm. Don't talk about her like that. Rachel blinked, caught off guard by the steel in Lila's tone. But the shock quickly melted into something colder. Excuse me, I said. Lila repeated, louder this time, her hands shaking with barely contained fury. Don't talk about her like that. She's done nothing wrong. And if this is the kind of place that looks down on people just because they need help, then maybe I don't belong here either. For a brief second, something flickered across Rachel's face. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe even the realization that she had pushed too far. But then, just as quickly, she straightened, her lips curling into a smirk. Well, then, I guess that makes things easier. Her voice was light, almost amused. You're fired. The words landed like a slap, sharp and humiliating. But Lila barely registered them. She wasn't afraid of losing this job. Not anymore. What scared her was the way Maggie flinched at Rachel's words, the way she curled in on herself, small and fragile, as if she had been scolded for simply existing. Lila's chest ached. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but before she could, the cafe doors swung open with force. The sudden gust of cold air sent a ripple through the room, and every head turned toward the entrance. And there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit that screamed authority. He scanned the cafe with sharp, restless eyes, and then they landed on Maggie. His entire body tensed, his breath caught. Mom. Maggie's head lifted at the sound of his voice, her cloudy eyes flickering with something almost like recognition. For a moment, she just stared, as if trying to grasp onto a memory just out of reach. Then her lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "Carter." The man crossed the cafe in an instant, kneeling beside her chair. His hands hovered, as if afraid she might disappear if he touched her too suddenly. His sharp, composed exterior cracked, and the raw emotion beneath it spilled through. Relief, fear, guilt, everything he had been holding back since she vanished. "Mom." His voice wavered with something unspoken. "I've been looking for you everywhere." Maggie blinked slowly, her fingers reaching out hesitantly. When he caught them on his own, warm and steady, something in her expression softened. She exhaled shakily, as if the weight of the world had finally lifted from her fragile shoulders. I got lost," she murmured, her brows knitting together. "I was trying to go home." Carter swallowed hard, nodding as he squeezed her hands. "I know. It's okay now. You're safe." Lila stood frozen, watching the scene unfold, an unexpected lump forming in her throat. She had never seen him before, but now, looking at him, at the way his usually composed demeanor had crumbled in the presence of his mother, she understood. He wasn't just some wealthy businessman. He was a son who had nearly lost the most important person in his life. Then, as if suddenly remembering where they were, Carter turned. His eyes locked on Lila, and for the first time, she saw it. Recognition, gratitude, something deeper than words could capture. "You're the one who took care of her," he said, his voice quieter now, steadier. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Lila shifted on her feet, suddenly self-conscious. I couldn't leave her alone." Carter studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand her completely in just that brief exchange. Then his gaze flickered toward Rachel, who had been standing off to the side, silent ever since he walked in. Rachel, who now looked painfully small under the weight of his attention. "She was just about to leave," Lila said, before she could stop herself. Rachel stiffened. Carter's expression didn't change. "Is that so?" His voice was polite, unreadable, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it, one that made Rachel pale slightly. Rachel started, but he had already looked away, dismissing her entirely. Instead, he turned back to Lila. "Come with me." Lila blinked, startled. "What?" Carter stood, his hands still wrapped protectively around Maggie's. "I want to talk," he said simply. "Somewhere else." Lila hesitated, glancing between them, unsure of what was happening. But then she looked at Maggie, at the way she clung to her son like an anchor, and she knew there was only one answer. Okay. The cafe, the job, the confrontation with Rachel, none of it mattered anymore. She had done what she needed to do. And as she followed Carter and Maggie out into the crisp afternoon air, she had the strangest feeling that, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't walking toward another dead end. She was walking toward something new. A moment later, Lila sat across from Carter in a quiet, upscale restaurant, far from the noisy cafe, far from everything she had known. The contrast was almost overwhelming. The sleek, modern decor, the hushed voices of well-dressed patrons, the way the servers moved with effortless precision. It was a world she had never belonged to. And yet, here she was, sitting across from a man who owned more wealth than she could fathom. She had learned who he was after they left the cafe. Carter Dawson, self-made millionaire, founder and CEO of Dawson Brew Company, one of the fastest-growing coffee house chains in the country. His name carried weight, power, influence. Yet, despite all that, he had looked at his mother with nothing but raw relief, and at Lila with genuine gratitude. He had wanted to hear her story, and when she hesitated, he simply said, "Please." So she told him about her mother, about the bills, about the constant struggle of trying to keep her head above water in a world that never seemed to let her breathe. Carter listened, not with the detached politeness of someone who felt obligated, but with the quiet intensity of someone who genuinely cared. And when she finished, when the silence stretched between them, he finally spoke. "I want to help you." Lila blinked, caught off guard. "What?" He leaned forward, his expression serious. "You saved my mother. You cared for her when no one else would. That means something to me, and I don't believe in repaying kindness with just words." She opened her mouth to protest, but he was already pulling out a checkbook. "This is for your mother's medical bills. he said, scribbling down a number and sliding the check across the table. Lila's breath caught in her throat. The amount, more than she had ever seen in her life, was enough to wipe out her mother's hospital debt completely. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, unable to comprehend what was happening. Carter, this is too much. I can't. You can. His voice was firm but not unkind. And that's not all. Lila looked up, still dazed. I own Dawson Brew Company, he continued, his gaze unwavering. I built it from the ground up. And I see something in you, Lila. You have passion, resilience, and you clearly care about people. That's the kind of person I want in my company. She stared at him, completely stunned. I'm offering you a full barista training course, everything from sourcing beans to mastering the craft. And beyond that, I want you to take a business management course, fully paid for, so that when the time is right, you can step into a leadership role. His lips quirked slightly. You stood up for what was right, even when it cost you your job. That's the kind of strength I want in my team. Lila's head spun. She had spent so long just trying to survive that she had never dared to think beyond the next paycheck, the next overdue bill. And now, sitting across from her, a millionaire was not just offering her financial relief, but a future, a real chance to grow, to thrive. She swallowed hard, emotion threatening to choke her. I don't know what to say. Carter's expression softened. Say yes. Lila exhaled shakily, her fingers tightening around the check, around the possibility of something more. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just being offered help. She was being offered a future. And this time, she wasn't going to let it slip away. This story reminds us that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can spark the biggest changes, not just in someone else's life, but in our own too. Mia started with a simple decision to help an elderly woman she didn't even know, and it led her down a path of self-discovery, resilience, and hope. But what if she had ignored Elena on that stormy night? Would her life still have transformed? Or would she have remained stuck in the same cycle of struggle and despair? The truth is, we all face storms, whether they're financial hardships, personal losses, or moments where the world feels cold and indifferent. But within those storms lies an opportunity to choose compassion over indifference, courage over fear, and action over hesitation. Every person you meet could be fighting battles you know nothing about, and your kindness might be the lifeline they desperately need. So today, as you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what will you do when life presents you with someone who needs help? Will you turn away because it's easier? Or will you step forward, knowing that even the smallest gesture can make a ripple effect far greater than you imagined? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about changing their lives. It's about discovering the strength, purpose, and humanity within ourselves. If this story touched your heart or gave you chills, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your friends and family. And if you want more powerful and emotional stories like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below about this story, and if you enjoyed this story, give it a big thumbs up. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that touch hearts and inspire change. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.